Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stella Klemper at Flourish Ventures. We invest in fintech entrepreneurs across the globe. We're here today to talk about how we can continue to make fintech better and safer. As you know, almost all of us use fintech apps. We use them for banking, for making payments, transferring money to a friend. And yet these apps are still relatively new. Most of us are used to traditional brick and mortar banks that are highly regulated, where we can feel confident that our money is safe. With fintech apps, there's been a lot of progress, but there's still more to be done to keep them safe and transparent. And that's where the Consumer Reports comes in. Many of you in the US will know Consumer Reports for their phenomenal work over the past 80 years, evaluating products like cars and household appliances. They've helped create new and better safety standards like seatbelt laws, and they've raised awareness about product risks like the dangers of smoking. What you might not know is that Consumer Reports has moved into the digital space as well. I'm here today with Delicia Hand, who's leading Consumer Reports work in fintech app evaluation. Delicia, welcome.
Thanks, Stella. Good to be here.
So good to have you. Delicia, fintech app evaluation is a relatively new territory for Consumer Reports. You just published your first 2 reports this year on peer-to-peer payments and buy now, pay later, and you have a 3rd report coming soon on banking apps. This is a big step for Consumer Reports. I'd love to hear more about it.
Sure. Yes. CR is helping consumers be safe when they shop online. So digital apps are now integrated across many aspects of our lives. Our own research shows that more than 80% of consumers use at least one fintech app, with the average consumers using roughly 4 different apps to manage their financial lives. And last year, we looked at buy now, pay later apps, for example, and we see that usage continuing to grow by as much as 50%. So because of CR's historical work, we have now safety standards for car seats, cigarettes, and household appliances, but we want to continue to be relevant to consumers by being responsive to the digital marketplace. And so this is why we're specifically examining the benefits and risk of digital finance apps.
I think this is such exciting work, Delicia. And we're seeing similar things at Flourish. I lead our research efforts. We see fintech usage just skyrocketing, but consumer trust is sometimes somewhat mixed still.
Yeah, absolutely. New tech means new benefits, but it also means new risks and challenges for consumers. And so there's reason to be concerned. Based on our testing to date, for example, 1 in 5 consumers report having sent money to the wrong person or losing money via a digital scam. Of the 4 P2P apps we evaluated, for example, none of them fully reimburse authorized transactions, which are due to scams. And most of the balances held in a P2P app may not be FDIC insured. So there's still some reasons for consumer trust to be mixed based on our research. And so given this growing usage alongside these persistent issues, there's a real need here for more transparency for consumers and guidance for fintech app providers. And this is why we think consumers will benefit from these comparisons. In the same way we compare Tesla to Toyota, we think it's appropriate that there be comparisons of your mobile banking app or your Cash App to Venmo.
So, Delicia, what really stands out here is that some of the security and privacy and data collection features of these apps, they're just perhaps not what the everyday customer would think. How are consumers viewing the apps? How are they responding to kind of the way that apps are operating today?
Sure. Great question. Look, consumers largely are having positive experiences. So even where there's room for improvement, overall, particularly with the P2P apps, as well as buy now, pay later, and then banking, which we're in the middle of, consumers are having a positive experience. There's definitely room for improvement, but there's some things that are going well. For example, the vast majority of consumers say that they would use their P2P and buy now, pay later apps again. Half of the consumers using banking apps have no or low fees, and the majority of consumers using banking apps feel really comfortable with the security features. They say that they're easy to use and they actually feel like their apps are keeping them secure from fraud and security breaches.
Especially for our international audience, one thing that I'd love to kind of focus on is that Consumer Reports work is fiercely independent. You do these evaluations independent of any other organizations. But what's unique is you also partner with the companies that you're evaluating to help them improve their products. And so I'd love to hear how that's applying to your fintech evaluations and how you've thought about that process.
Sure. So we want to help consumers' lives be easier in the continually evolving digital space. But consumers and companies have to do this without clear standards and guidance, and frankly, not the same kind of stress testing that occurs with other product areas. It's not enough to look backwards and create protections after a crisis when technology is continually moving forward. So we have three stakeholders. We serve consumers, we work with the companies to identify actionable ways to improve products, and in parallel, we translate our findings into policy recommendations. Core to our methodology is that we don't just work in a vacuum. The same ecosystem that we share our results with have actually helped to construct our framework, which we use to test products. We evaluate apps across 7 dimensions: privacy, safety, transparency, financial well-being, inclusivity, and environmental and social governance. And this framework, which we use to evaluate fintech products, was developed in partnership with academics, fintech companies, regulators, consumer advocates, a diverse set of stakeholders. And in our first 2 evaluations, we focused on safety, privacy, and transparency, looked at things like the presence of industry standard practices, data sharing practices, meaningful explanation of service. And then our most recent evaluation, banking apps, expanded our assessment to examine inclusivity, user centricity, and consumer financial well-being. We do this through product testing and consumer research. So on the product testing side, this comprises document review of all types. We look at websites, we look at documentation in the app, but we also do user interface review. We download the apps, we set up individual accounts, and we go through the basic user process in setting up these accounts. We do product and technical tests, relying mostly on software to see things like network traffic analysis. On the user research side, we do a combination of quantitative and qualitative research, so leveraging nationally representative surveys, as well as engagement with actual product users. We do this as focus groups or online discussion boards.
And so, Delicia, thus far, your focus has been, you said you have this wonderful framework around fair digital finance. You focused on its security, transparency, and one more.
Privacy.
Privacy, yes. Security, transparency, and privacy. And thus far, your evaluations have focused on some of the largest consumer-facing apps in the US. We work at Flourish, we invest in early stage founders. And I expect we have a lot of early stage founders on the call today. What would you say to them? What are some learnings that would apply?
Yeah, so we see some common pitfalls. We also do see some positive things. So on the needs improvement side, general security practices and fraud monitoring and notification are areas which need improvement. Additionally, transparency, and then data collection practices could be improved. Going a little bit deeper in the security practices category, some of the things that we've observed are things like incomplete security pages, insufficient authentication procedures, such as apps not timing out when a device is left unattended. In this day and age, multi-factor authentication should be used across all apps on all digital products, but it's actually surprisingly still possible for consumers to use these apps with simple to guess passwords. So these are small but important fixes and not just form over substance. Additionally, we think there's a missed opportunity, and we've observed this, to use the technology to make information simpler and more accessible to consumers. It may have made sense in one age, pre-technology, pre the digital age, to have contracts with fine print, right? But in a app environment where consumers are looking at very small screen, it just simply doesn't make sense to have the same fine print disclosures. But we're still seeing a lot of that. We're not seeing companies really taking advantage of the app environment. And last, with respect to consumer data, data is being collected and shared beyond the primary use of the fintech product. 10 out of the 12 apps that we've tested to date collect more data than needed. And while consumers may be willing to give up some privacy, they do have increased concerns about their own digital footprint and what happens to their personal data. So we broadly recommend a data minimization approach, which means that the default should be to opt consumers out of overly broad data sharing and information collection. So this is some of what we're seeing.
I want to push you on this a little bit, Delicia, and we've talked about this before. I think, especially in early stages of company development, there are trade-offs that are made, and entrepreneurs are really focused, and startup teams are focused on getting their product up and running and complying with regulation. And so, what I'm hearing you say is that's not enough. It's not enough to just simply be in compliance, but really you have to go above and beyond when it comes to security, when it comes to data collection, when it comes to transparency. Personally, like I, as a consumer, I don't read fine print usually. I may not always be aware if two-factor authentication is set up. I'm just assuming that my bank or my app is going to refund me if there's fraud. And so I want to push you a little bit on that, because there's so many competing priorities. Why should this be the top one?
Absolutely. That's a great point. We know consumers don't read disclosures, but it shouldn't be on the consumer it is not on the consumer to design the best product, right? It's on the companies and the entrepreneurs. And so counterintuitively, early on is probably the best time to set the best standards, especially in an environment where there's continual iteration and evolution, and new products are coming into the marketplace every day. And so I would proffer that rather than putting out products based on what existed before or even today, try to think about not just putting out the newest and best products, but also the best practices that really leverage those new technologies. So before a certain set of practices get baked in over time, think about things like, are there ways to integrate into the user experience clearer and simpler language? It's important to make these investments earlier on, to guard against having to pay a bigger price when you are a more mature organization. This will mean that you have a stronger and more secure product when you build in the policy and the IT architecture from the beginning, rather than bolting on fixes later on. So for new entrants, I would say there's more opportunity to design from a best practices perspective. And it's a slightly different challenge than incumbent organizations who have more baked in processes.
I really like this concept of having the right practice from the beginning.
Yeah.
If you really apply that, so when you have at Flourish, we have founders who are struggling to find enough entrepreneurs, they have limited cash, they have to make some trade-offs. What's the one thing, or do you have examples of kind of concrete examples of what's worked well for others?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing, in the work that I'm doing in the broader ecosystem, you often hear a lot of conversation about out of the box, low code, B2B tech or infrastructure products that are available that are really facilitating a lot of experimentation. But there's a lot of non-experimental stuff that is available that can be part of your product development. There's fraud detection software companies, ways of automating deep behavioral networks to manage risk. There are governance as software solution approaches, and a number of companies that are out there, like Sardine or Zest or Fair Play, are just a few examples of companies that provide these offerings in the marketplace, which may be one way in which companies can new entrants to the marketplace can actually manage some of these considerations.
Flourish, we invest in infrastructure companies as well, and I think that there's so much innovation on that front. You and I had also talked about who you hire for your co-founders, who you hire for your early C-suite. And you'd said, I remember you saying that compliance officers often come in on the later side rather than on the earlier side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can invest in tech, but also invest in people. We understand there's always going to be trade-offs, but one of the things that I've seen over the years is that the capabilities and resource personnel investments. One of the last investments that's often made has to do around compliance. And so, what if you started on day one thinking about things from a compliance perspective and really integrating that and leveraging governance as a software approaches, for example, in the build out of your product. So that's also another way to think about the investment.
I feel like you've given us a lot to consider, Delicia. I wanted to ask you a bit about your upcoming work. So you've been preparing an evaluation of banking apps. Can you share a little preview of some of the highlights from that work?
Sure. So we've evaluated 10 banking apps. And really the apps are the delivery mechanism for the financial institution, right? And these are both some of the largest traditional banks as well as newer neobanks or fintechs that provide depository institutions. So we're seeing a lot of positive practices. And so more food for thought. Of the apps that we've evaluated, for example, we're seeing really strong levels of security across multiple layers, including account security, network security, fund protection, and protection against suspicious activities. This is different from what we have seen when we've evaluated in our prior two studies evaluating buy now, pay later, for example. In prior studies, there wasn't often a timeout after inactivity. And so far, the banking apps are across the board in this category doing well. So the apps are locking users out after 10 failed password attempts. We're not seeing password requirements shorter than 8 characters. They're not accepted. They often use multi-factor authentication and things like that.
Lisa, I want to jump in. I think so. Security is one big component. One area where you went deeper on banking apps is you mentioned to me you really have focus on financial health, and I think that's a newer concept. Really focusing not just on security, transparency, and privacy, but thinking about your customers' outcomes and how well you're serving their needs and their ultimate well-being. And I'd love if you can share a little more about how you thought about financial health, what factors you considered, and what that looks like.
Sure. So we're actually evaluating financial well-being. And in that category, it includes considerations like financial health. And specifically there, we are looking to see that digital finance applications and services support the overall user's financial well-being. In other words, what are the conditions set by the company that support the user setting goals, whether those goals might be being able to weather financial difficulty or save towards something. And then what are the design and features of an app that help to facilitate that? This could be the availability of tools that helps a consumer monitor, keep track, shift funds, for example, moving from just educational materials to actual tools and engagement activities that are built into the user experience. So that is what we're looking for. And We sort of see room for improvement. So although a number of the apps have a good amount of educational content which touch on these topics, we're not seeing as much of that dynamic user experience that really integrates this information into the consumer's day-to-day transactions. So that way, I would say this is one of the areas that we see for improvement. Additionally, in surveying consumer users, more than half of consumers didn't really have awareness that their bank actually had these facilities available. So even where you had great content, do consumers actually have awareness of those features?
You said something, and I might have missed it. You said that you'd like to see more of the consumer's data being integrated into the products. Did I hear that right?
So not so much integration of the consumer data, but to the extent that there's educational content or specific actions that a consumer can take, which might help them meet their own financial well-being goals. We'd like to see these characteristics and features integrated into the app. In other words, it's great to have educational content on your website. Have you translated this into pop-ups or screens that pop up after a user does something? Let's say they move money to a savings account as part of their app. That might be the time to send them some kind of push notification while they're in the app. So more dynamism in the overall app experience. Hope that's clear.
That's, yeah. One other thing we touched on briefly is that your evaluations have been somewhat iterative as you're learning. This has been your first or second round of evaluations. And that you're also engaging a lot with the companies that you've been evaluating. Can you share more about that process, what that's looked like, and how you've been engaging with different companies?
Yeah, so I referred before to our methodologies. And so I talked about product testing and the consumer research that we do. We now refer to the company engagement as the third part of our methodology. So after we do the testing and the user research, we reach out to the companies and we begin a process where we're in conversation with them. We're sharing our initial findings. That provides an opportunity to validate our findings, fill any gaps, provide context. We can provide context for how we're viewing certain information. They can provide context for any disconnect between their stated policies and actual practices. So it really helps for us to land on, what we view the data to be telling us or not. Additionally, it provides just an incredible opportunity to engage with the companies to identify opportunities for improvement. Where are there quick fixes that companies can make to improve the product experience, or the user experience rather. And we've had some success in doing so. We've caught some things like incomplete security pages or language that might not have been clear, or frankly, being able to compare a number of apps. We've been able to situate companies with respect to their competitors and say, well, actually, this is a best practice that we would recommend, and then engage in conversation with the company to improve the product.
I think that's so great. So it's not just a kind of a static evaluation, but a real opportunity for a dialogue also. And you see real change coming out of that.
Absolutely. In all of our evaluations to date, we've come out of that with companies making adjustments. Some things we can't talk about publicly, but they've been meaningful, and other adjustments are apparent, more directly apparent to consumers. But as I mentioned before, it also helps us, which our product is the evaluation framework. We want it to be iterative and to improve over time. We also want it to be reasonably generalizable to a number of different products. And so the back and forth really facilitates our learning and our ability to make sure that we're asking the right questions, we're using the right methodologies and procedures to extract information that is useful to companies in addition to consumers.
And Delicia, you come from a background at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Tell me a little bit more about your journey, how you got here, how you engage with policymakers and regulators today.
Sure. I spent 10 years at the CFPB in various roles. And my last role at the CFPB, I oversaw a number of functions, which in my view, connected directly to the consumer experience in the marketplace. So it started to kind of shape some early thoughts about this work that I'm able to do now at Consumer Reports. So we would meet with various external stakeholders. We also had teams that represented various consumer segments, which did bring in data and research about the consumer experience in the marketplace. We also had a team that managed the Bureau's complaint process. And that was also a set of data points about the consumer experience and where consumers were really getting stuck across various products. And I thought, well, this is really rich data. And at the time, we were really at the start of the pandemic, and we used that and aggregated that data to really give us direction during the pandemic. In this context, similar perspectives, so applied consumer research as well as some product testing, focus on really trying to provide clear guidance. So while at the CFPB, because we were a regulator, there really wasn't a space for us to be providing concrete product or company-specific recommendations. And so that's where I thought, there's a real opportunity here to have a different kind of dialogue at Consumer Reports. We're not a regulator. We're not evaluating for compliance with anything per se, but we're really trying to do that cross product comparison, put information out there that consumers might use, but frankly, participants in the ecosystem, like companies who are delivering those products, can also use that and see how they are with their competitors and also identify opportunities for improvement.
Delicia, stepping back, what's on the horizon for you at Consumer Reports, and what are you looking forward to in the coming year?
Sure. Well, we will be releasing in a few months' time the results of our banking apps, and then we're going to move to the next phase of doing more evaluations in a more streamlined way and doing continual refresh. As I mentioned at the top, we are evolving. So we want to become known for the reliable source that lets you know what happens when you use these digital products. And so we're going to be doing more evaluations and then working to integrate these evaluations into the consumer experience. We're not just talking the talk, we're aiming to also walk it by exploring ways in which we can integrate this information into the user experience. One of the things that we are looking at, for example, is can we build a plugin or work with ecosystem partners that can show our app ratings while consumers are at the shopping cart online. Imagine if you're at Amazon and you're going to choose from the various payment options. What if you could avail yourself of the recent ratings to compare what was a better option for you, your own credit card versus a pay in 4 option? So we're also innovating ourselves to think about how we can make this information available to consumers.
I love that. I feel like you're applying your own principles to your own work.
Absolutely. We're trying, at least.
Delicia, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I think you really highlighted some of the challenges we're facing, and also a lot of opportunities that we really have to act on in the fintech space. I so appreciate this conversation, and we appreciate the work that Consumer Reports is doing. And I know we could all use the extra help. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you all for joining us today. For questions about today's discussion or about Flourish Ventures, please email us at events@flourishventures.com. Thank you.